Good morning, all. I'm Robert Knowles. This is Jeff Franklin. We're here again for History with R&R Live. How are you doing,
Good.
Jeff?
Doing pretty well today, Robert. It's good to be here. Good to see everyone in chat.
Yes, absolutely. We should take a quick run through. Yitzi Lemons, who is the mastermind behind all of the artwork you see on this channel. Thank you so much, sir. You make my channel look professional, and I have gratitude for that.
Including that artwork behind
Yes.
me.
Like I said, all the odd artwork you see on the channel is due to that man's brilliance, not mine. I have nothing to do with it. Also, James Fireman, welcome. Super Blubberpuss, welcome. Dave G. Sound, welcome. Kapla Bird of Prey 5. John DeMarco, there's my co-host. Not Ryan Johnson, welcome. Mark the Inflate Tired. Mary's Game Room, my love, good morning. And yes, now to welcome our guest. Our guest today, we're going to be on the topic of Antarctica and all the wonderful rumors and innuendo that went along with that for history. So without further ado, welcome the old media guy.
Hi there. And I want to say my avatar is also made by Yitzi Lemons, so
Yes,
all the artwork.
He's an awesome person. He does a lot of stuff. I know I went to him a little while back. My brother, the poor guy, he doesn't do social media or Facebook. I don't think he'd know what to do with it if you gave it to him. And his small business, I mean, he just does a little ma and pa lawn care, snow removal thing. And it's needed a refresh and price changes and better just overall things. And Yitzi did an awesome graphic for his company, and I'm so greatly appreciative of that. Blew my brother away. He got my brother and my son in a caricature, and my son was over the moon, and so just thank you to him for that. But anyway, on to the topic at hand today. Basically, Antarctica. It's one of those little places where a lot has been said and very little has been proven. How's that? Does that sound right, old media guy?
Well, let's just say that the people who have been there or have studied it have a very different view of the place than people who listen to conspiracy theories.
Yes.
Yes, there is absolutely no evidence of a hollow Earth or an entrance through Antarctica to a hollow Earth. And if there were, I'd be the first to tell you, because that'd be so cool.
Oh, well, there's the other one. There's not only the entrance to a hollow Earth, but apparently there's the entrance to hell.
I've heard
that's
that
through
one
the
too.
doors of the IRS.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if anyone from the IRS is listening, I love you guys. You do a great job. Thanks.
Yeah. I'm in Canada. You suck.
Well, the particular instance about Antarctica I want to talk about is it's not a very well-known story. In fact, there's only been 2 books written on it, one in 1914 and the other in 2010. And talking about it is a little bit like talking for an hour about how C-3PO was shot by stormtroopers and put back together by a Wookiee without referencing any of the other movies, any of the TV shows, any of the extended universe, just that one thing. So what this was a side quest of a main expedition that went wrong, but everyone survived.
Okay. Well, that's always good.
Now, what this was, yeah, it was very good for the 6. What this was 6 guys. They were part of Captain Scott's second expedition to Antarctica. And probably if you know anything about Antarctic expedition before 1920, you know that's the one he died on. But they had this side quest, and their side quest was miserable. If this was a video game, it'd be 1 star, never playing this again.
Yeah.
Because they were supposed to go east, and they went east, and they found another expedition headed by Norwegian Roald Amundsen. So they couldn't go east because they felt that might have incited a fight. Let's put it that way. So they had to turn around and find another place to land. And the only place they could actually land due to the sea ice was a place that was of almost no value. So imagine dedicating yourself to 3 years of exploration in a very cold, often very dark place. And the first place you go to really do some work is a place that everyone already knows about, and there's not much to do. So they had an Antarctic winter. By an Antarctic winter, I mean 3 months of it being midnight outside. Sometimes you could see the moon and stars. Sometimes it was cloud covered. The winds were horrible. So you can imagine winds so bad that stuff is falling off your walls. Not only that, you've only got some plywood between you and the outdoors.
Yeah. A little bit of tarp. No big deal.
Yeah, some tarp.
Yeah.
So they're finally picked up. They spent, after months and months together with, imagine this, just you and 5 other people that you don't really like all that much. You're stuck together for winter that's very, very cold, where 60 degrees is hot. It's a heat wave.
Sounds like my
Just
security
one
career.
person in your, yeah, there's this one guy in the hut who wants to make it 60 degrees, and everyone else is like, turn it down, it's too hot. So you get 3
Now,
days
of
on
course,
board
we're talking-
the ship when you're picked up. I'm sorry, go
We're
ahead.
talking 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
Fahrenheit, yeah, all temperatures are Fahrenheit in this.
Yeah.
So they get picked up. They're on a ship for 3 days, like the first time in a year you've actually seen new people. They say, we're going to set you down in this one spot that no one's ever explored. Oh, yeah, perfect. And you've got about 5, maybe 6 weeks, and we'll pick you up. Yeah, not a problem. And we're going to give you about 10 weeks worth of rations, plus some emergency rations just in case. Yeah, no problem. And you're stuck there. You're stuck there in threadbare tents made with bamboo poles that are breaking from the wind. Your clothing stinks. You haven't had a bath in ages. You're looking at your food supply, realizing we're not going to make it through unless we kill seals and penguins, mostly emperor penguins. And on top of that, to get out of the wind, which you know is going to kill you or at the least drive you insane, you have to dig out an ice cave and find a way to live in that. Again, where 3 months is nothing but darkness. The only light you get is from the seal blubber. You basically go to, and you're hungry every night. You're hungry every morning. You have breakfast, and 15 minutes later, you're hungry again. And imagine what it's going to be like to cook in there using seal tallow, probably the worst tallow to cook with, apart from, say, elephant tallow. But it gave you light, but it also gave you lots of smoke.
Oh, yeah.
And there was always the danger
Sure.
you'd asphyxiate in there.
Yeah.
So imagine doing that and then coming out in the Antarctic spring and having to travel by foot for a month along sea ice, all the time wondering, why did they leave us? What happened? Did the ship sink? Is everyone dead? Are we going to get back to the main hut and we will be the only people in Antarctica that we know of? Are they going to send a relief ship? Are we going to have to, once we hit the hut, are we going to have to do what we did before, which is kill as many seals and penguins as possible and manage through a 3rd winter? All of these things going through their mind. In the end, they survived. They only had to spend 2 winters there. They were very lucky that the reason they hadn't been picked up was just basically accident. It wasn't a tragedy. But their story was completely overshadowed by Scott's death on that expedition. And in Britain, you didn't hear anything about Campbell, the leader of this particular party, or Shackleton until the late 50s. So this happens in 1912, 1913. So for over 40 years, you only heard one thing: Scott's death, his magnificent death, his glorious death. So in the 50s, they start to talk about Shackleton and his second expedition, which is a whole other topic. And here in 2010, you finally get a book about Campbell's party and how they survived one of the most grueling ordeals that one can imagine that would have sent most of us around the twist, to use a British term. But they survived it partly because of their training and partly good luck. I mean, it's one of those, it's like Shackleton's second expedition where bad things happen, but luckily not so bad everyone dies.
Yeah. Or are forced to eat each other. Those ones are always bad.
Yeah, there was never any inkling that they would have to eat each other in this one, at least according to the records they left, because we have their diaries. But that's the thing. The only bad thing I'll say about this book is that it's written by a Brit, and the Brits are always very circumspect about what was happening. Oh, yeah, someone had a fight with someone else, and they won't say who. It's like, come on,
Yeah,
an American author would say Joe had a fight with Bob, and
yeah, a little vague on the detail. Yeah,
yeah, it's vague on the deals. Yes, we don't want to embarrass anybody, but they're all dead.
yeah. Well, you know, they don't want to pull a Stephen King and take 3 chapters to describe a blade of grass. Just saying.
I don't know if it's quite that bad.
Oh.
Tolkien just bad. Look at this countryside, Sam. Yeah, I'm looking, Mr. Frodo. So Professor Brainy Specs has put a couple of links there into the chat. One is The Longest Winter, Scott's Other Heroes. That's the book I'm referring to. It's by Meredith Hooper. It's a well-written book. This is just about this particular survival story. And the one above it is 1912, the year the world discovered Antarctica, because before 1912, it was just a few sketch lines on a map. And that kind of gets you up to speed with what's called the classical era of Antarctic exploration, i.e., before it was Byrd. Yeah, Byrd flew over the mountain range to the South Pole from, I guess it was the Weddell Sea. I can't remember. Sorry. I think he did it in 8 or 12 hours, something like that. Whereas before that took weeks and weeks. So that's the beginning of modern exploration. So with a classic or golden age of Antarctic exploration, the best technology you had for example, in this case, this expedition was the ship, the Terra Nova, which was made of wood. It had sails. And it also had a coal burning engine. And that was the top of the line technology they got to use when they were traveling to Antarctica. They tried to bring the first motorized sledges to Antarctica, and they failed within a few miles. So everything that you have nowadays has been developed since.
What's this? My fuel line froze. What the hell?
Yeah, that's exactly what was happening. That was exactly what was happening.
My
Can
fuel
you fix
line
this
froze?
fuel line? Yeah, so you can imagine if in Antarctica, if it's 30 degrees Fahrenheit out, so -2 centigrade, it's a warm day. So imagine on a cold day saying, well, you got to fix that fuel line. You know, it's only 20 below. Go at it.
Yeah.
So
but by the time you get your gloves off, they're froze. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had to work in -40, -50. That sucks. It sucks. It just sucks. There's no other way to put it. It sucks.
Now imagine this: the Campbell expedition, they faced that exactly. But imagine that your wind clothes are soaked with oil, that is seal blubber oil. And because you're eating mostly meat, your urine is very acidic. So you're peeing on yourself because there's literally no time to get out of your bag to get to any sort of latrine. And they eventually did have a latrine inside, but only one. So if someone else was on it, you had to go outside in the wind. They had bouts of diarrhea because they were cooking their food with seawater. They did that because they had to preserve their salt supply. So you had one guy. So their sleeping arrangements, they were all 6 of them together in the back of this ice cave, kind of like interlevered sleeping bags together. So imagine a dorm room with about 9 people sleeping in sleeping bags on the floor. That gives you an idea about how they were set up. There's 6 of them. Imagine one guy having diarrhea so bad he's getting up 8 times a night, scrambling past you as fast as he can and trying to sleep during that, plus the cold, plus your hunger, plus everything else, plus being homesick. They were homesick, but they really didn't talk about it because they knew it was going to make it worse. So one of the reasons they survived is they had 5 out of the 6 of them were in the Royal Navy. And of course, the Royal Navy had some traditions that we look back on as perhaps inhumane or cruel.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Without those traditions of this is how it's going to work, and you men will take orders from the officers, and you're not going to talk back, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, there was no such thing as I don't feel like doing that, sir.
Right.
Well, now, this whip here will tell you that you're going to do this.
Right.
Sometimes people did say F off to the officers and such, but it was kind of understood everyone was under a lot of stress. And if the person who said that, you know, one trick the officer could do is say, "What did you say, Burns?" or whatever your name was. And Burns would go, "Sorry, sir, not feeling well today." "It's all right, Burns." They just kind of smooth it over. But if they had the mindset that we can do whatever we want to, and you can't tell me what to do, and I'm going to do what I want to do, they would all have been dead.
No, they're
So
dead.
part of what
Yeah.
saved them was their discipline. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't have you can't have the inmates run the asylum, as it were.
Right. And so from the outside, it looks very cruel where the three
Yeah.
officers have the most rights and the three men just have to sit back and take it. But
Yeah.
if they
But-
hadn't, they would have all died.
Yeah, absolutely. Certain situations you need that chain of command, and if you don't have
Yeah.
the chain of command, everything falls apart.
Yeah.
So, media guy,
Yep.
why did Captain Scott's expedition fail? Why did they all die before getting back to camp, to the base?
There is a modern documentary where they rerun the race in Greenland, where it is the exact equipment, the exact clothing, the exact food for both the Norwegian side, Amundsen's team, and Scott's side. And what happens in this documentary, I think it's called Blizzard, is an almost exact duplication of what happened in real life, which is the Norwegians get there and get back, everything's fine. Some of the men actually gain weight on the journey, even though they're working all the time, because Amundsen worked out exactly what clothes to take, what food to take, and all that from his time with the Inuit. He was a survival expert. The Brits went in thinking, we're going to conquer this land because we're Brits. That's what we do. We conquer everything we come up against. And it's not even exaggeration. I'm not making fun of them. That's what they thought.
No, that's
That's
Kinda
their
the same with-
mentality.
that's the mentality.
Same with the French army before World
Oh.
War I, where they said the spirit of Elan will take over and we'll just crush everybody. It's like, no, that's not how
No.
it works. So the British went in saying, we're going to make it with the clothes we design and the food we bring. And they actually brought ponies to this expedition, by the way. There is no plant life in Antarctica that ponies can eat. There's only moss and lichens on the coast and such.
Yes.
Seaweed also, but where they were going, there's no seaweed.
No.
So anyway, they went with clothing that was inadequate. They went with food that was highly inadequate. And on top of that, they encountered one of the worst Antarctic winters ever on record. Apparently, since records of this type have been kept, there's only 4 winters that were as bad as the one Scott faced. And there was also one other thing, is that they had what was called 1-ton depot. Meaning, if you could get to that depot, you would have all the food you need. And a lot of what Antarctic survival meant was going from depot to depot.
Yeah.
Well, he actually dies 11 miles south of that depot. And the reason
Oh,
that
wow.
depot is where it was is when they first got there in 1911, they moved forward very quickly to set up this depot and then pulled back again because winter was coming.
Yeah.
And they could have moved that depot further south. And Oates, one of the guys who dies with Scott, says to Scott, you could get this 11 miles, 12 miles, something like that, further south, but we're going to have to kill the dogs. And when Scott had been in Antarctica the first time, they had brought dogs, didn't know how to use them, had to kill them because of bad fish. The fish they had bought, believe it or not, wasn't frozen through all the way. So the dogs were suffering horribly, and they had no guns. All they had was knives. So Scott basically had PTSD about having to kill dogs with knives or just kill them in the first place because the Brits didn't want to kill dogs. So he said, no, it's going to be too hard on the dogs. We are going to have to make the depot here. And Oates said, look, this could go really bad on us if you do this. And Scott said, well, I'm in charge and this is what's happening.
Yeah.
Well, if Scott had been more
Mhm.
bloodthirsty like Amundsen, they could have gotten that depot farther south. And maybe, just maybe, Scott and his party of 3 could have made it to that depot and somehow survived. Maybe, sort of, kind of. It's hard to say because that winter was brutal and they were literally starving to death on the way back. And we see that in the Blizzard documentary, that the English team was literally starving. You can watch them starve and you're looking at their faces in disbelief going, am I watching someone starve? And by the end, they show a before and after picture of one particular guy who had lost 25% of his body weight and his brain had shrunk in size. Yeah, that's how
my.
bad he was. And this is just a simulated run. This wasn't the real thing. So
Yeah.
it's likely if we could go back in time and visit them just before they died in their hut, we would say they were all starving and malnourished and they weren't going to make it very far, even if it were spring weather in Britain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, to be fair to Scott, yeah, to be fair to Scott, the whole concept of vitamins didn't occur for another 7 odd years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we would say,
Like,
well, what kind of
we look
nutrition do
back.
they have?
Yeah. We look back
Yeah.
now with modern thinking. It's like, no, that wasn't the thing. What are you talking about?
Mhm.
Same with equipment. Like, we have much better equipment now than they did then.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's
Oh,
a
yeah.
no-brainer,
And Scott
but
was-
it's overlooked a lot.
Yeah, and Scott really deserves credit for being the first to say, can we make motorized vehicles work in Antarctica? Because Amundsen wasn't going to do that. He just wanted to get to the pole and get the glory. He was a
Yeah.
glory hound. Scott was also a glory hound, but he was very, very interested in science. I mean, anything like photography. He got the camera artist of the group, Ponting, to show him how to do the photography of the age and the old style glass plate photography. And we still have his pictures. You can get the book, The Lost Photographs of Captain Scott, they're called. So he was a very interesting man. He's not someone I think I would enjoy being in Antarctica with, but he's a very interesting man. And if he had the ability to take planes down, he would have tried it. So yeah, I think Scott would be very happy if he could come back. He'd say, I'm very happy that you all are doing science and you're bringing technology down here and you're using the latest and greatest. And Amundsen would have been like, well, yeah, but I got there first. Someone buy me.
Yeah. That's all he cared about, was getting there first. Yeah.
Now, if
He's
I
a tough
understand-
hombre. I mean, but yeah, that's all he wanted was to get there first.
Now, if I understand it correctly, they actually went down during the summer, the Antarctic summer, and were returning trying to beat the winter. And
Yes.
Captain Scott, he had done studies on the weather down there, and he predicted how cold it would get. And from our modern perspective with satellites and all that, his estimation for a typical Antarctic winter was correct. But that particular winter had been cold, particularly cold,
Yes.
unusually so.
Yes.
So
he made
global
some bad
warming hadn't kicked
decisions.
in yet.
Yeah, he made some bad decisions.
Don't get me
There's no
started on
question
that.
about He made some good
I had
decisions.
to.
And then there was just, it's like, why do bad things happen to you? You could basically sum it up in 3 different categories: stuff you do to yourself, stuff other people do to you, and then just chaos.
Yeah.
Right? You cannot control whether a tornado hits your house or not. And that's what Scott faced. That winter was so horrible. It's just, and it's an open question whether he would have survived even if it had been a decent winter, a decent spring and summer, and then a mild winter. So he could have traveled farther because of the nutritional issue.
Yeah.
We'd like to think he would have made it, but there were so many contradictory
It
orders
still
that were
hits and
given,
miss.
and
It still hits and miss.
yeah. And they had some very strange ideas that, for example, that not everyone who was going to be sent out onto the ice had to know how to navigate. You won't need that, so we're not going to teach.
Oh.
you.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
nowadays,
Oh boy.
nowadays I think they've changed all that around because they looked at that and said, well,
Yeah.
absolutely, Cherry Garrard had to lead an expedition. It was just him and Miraz, the Russian dog sled dude. They had to manhaul some supplies out to One Ton Depot just in case Scott was there. And here he is. He'd never led an expedition, and now he's the leader. He's never navigated. Now he's the navigator. And he somehow got there and back. And the thing that haunted him till his dying day, to the point that he had a catatonic attack in the 40s, was that he knew he could have gone on from One Ton Depot. He could have gone south. He could have possibly met up with Scott. He could have possibly helped them get back. But his partner, Miraz, was having some sort of attack where it looked like a stroke at the time because half his body was paralyzed. And he had no orders to go forward. So he only had orders to go to One Ton Depot and back. And they were very, very strict on orders, which they had to be. So poor Cherry Garrard had to turn around with Miraz, who suddenly got better. So it was all... I'm losing the word, but obviously you didn't have a stroke.
No.
So the idea that you would send out someone to rescue Scott, have a backup plan like that, it just wasn't there. In fact, there was the question about, should we go after Campbell's party? These 6 that I'm talking about lived in the ice cave. And the consensus was, no, they'll be just fine. Let's go find Scott's dead body instead, because they knew by that time he was dead.
Yeah.
And I think now the protocol would be, Yeah, the protocol would be if you got two groups and you know one of them's dead, you know one of them's alive or could be alive, you go after the group that's alive. You don't go after corpses. But at that time, they were running off of British sentiment, and
Yeah.
nothing against British sentiment. It just doesn't work in that extreme environment because, of course, British sentiment is about how you survive in Britain or at that time in India or in one of the other colonies. Antarctica was just, it was a very unknown
Another day
factor.
at
The
the
only one who
office.
claimed to know it was Amundsen because of his life with the Inuit.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a longer answer than you wanted.
And then later on, I mean,
No, it's
some
fine.
of the machinery that they would use, like later on, not then, but later on, it always amazed me how a lot of the stuff that they use now are based on stuff the Russians brought down.
Right. So the Russians and the Norwegians would be the groups you would want or expect to go down there if you were being purely practical. But at that point, it was a race for national honor, which is something we don't really think about anymore. And James Furman in the chat says, our canine brothers are like family to us Brits. We value their lives over the lives of strangers. And I get that. I really get that. With 2020 hindsight, we can say going to the Antarctic in the 1910s with dogs is not something the Brits should ever have done. But the problem with the Antarctic is you need dogs to survive.
Yeah.
And as others have said about Amundsen, he trained with the Inuit. He knew what he was doing, but the ice has a price. For example, he knew that they had to go from their base up the Beardmore Glacier. That it was unknown territory he was going. He didn't know what he was going to find, but he found a route up the glacier. It only took 3 days, which was just absolutely fast. And according to his plan, this was planned from day one. We're going to get to the top of the glacier. We're going to find a safe place to camp, and we're going to butcher half the dogs with knives, I believe. I don't believe they could have used rifles, but still, we're going to pick out the 25 out of 50 that aren't as strong as the others. We're going to kill them all. We're going to butcher them all. We're going to eat the best meat ourselves. We've got the vitamin C, and the lesser meat we feed to the other dogs. That was part of his plan, and nobody was going to object because they just weren't. Whereas Brits or Americans or many other groups would say, no, that's too high a price. That's what Scott said, and it cost Scott his life. So in extreme territory, you cannot be sentimental, and it's very hard for us to wrap our heads around, and that's okay. I personally don't want to walk around the state of Texas thinking I got to treat myself or treat life as if this were in the Antarctic. It's just too brutal. But we do have to remember, in extreme conditions, you have to think more like Spock, if you will, than like Scotty or like Bones.
Self-preservation
metaphor. Yeah.
Self-preservation.
In the Antarctic, you listen to Spock, you don't listen to Bones. My God, you can't. Yes, we can, Doctor. And
yes, we can. Shut up.
Shut up.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to Star Trek into this, but
no, that's
we were
okay.
We're talking about Yahtzee UFOs earlier, so.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to touch a little bit on that near the end, but yeah.
Okay.
Because it fascinates the hell out of me just how many stupid things have been said about down there.
Yes,
but,
absolutely.
But I'll, Jeff, you were going to make a point.
Yeah, I read a little bit about this, and one of the points that I read was because the winter was so cold, the ice, the temperature had gone down to minus 40. And the ice becomes a lot more rough when it gets that cold, as opposed to, let's just say, minus 30. If it had been a little bit warmer, a typical Antarctic winter, the ice wouldn't have been as rough, would have been smoother, and they wouldn't have had to expend so much energy trying to pull their sleds back
That's
north.
Absolutely true.
Well, not only that, but now I have not been to the Antarctic, but I have been on the lake in the middle of winter in minus 40, minus 36. And what a lot of people don't even realize is just breathing is an effort.
Yep. Oh, I imagine.
When you breathe in that cold air, if you're doing something that requires energy and you're breathing in those big, deep breaths when you're working up, even cold air can hurt going down. It literally hurts after a while. and just the ice itself. I mean, you can get a drift on the ice that it's depending on where it is, it can be soft, which means it's easy to plow through, or it's soft on the outside and hard as in the middle. So you come to an abrupt halt. I've seen snowmobiles go ass over tea kettle because they thought it would be a soft drift, and there's a piece of ice in the middle, and the skis hit the ice and over it goes. So the ice, just dealing with the ice and the cold, never mind anything else, is so tasking because, even just breathing in the cold air can get to you.
Yeah. There's another book written about a different aspect of this expedition called The Worst Journey in the World, written by actually Jerry Garrard, who can tell you more about the Scott side of things, but also his particular side quest to go get emperor penguin eggs. And on that particular expedition, there's just 3 men, and they found, I think it was minus 30 Fahrenheit. It was pretty easy going with the sled. And then, as James says, around minus 40 centigrade or Fahrenheit, it's the same. The snow and ice starts to get sticky. And then he said around about minus 60, it starts to feel like sand.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine trying to drag a sledge through the Sahara Desert. Not the heat, but that friction coefficient was that high. And on that particular trip, it got down to minus 70. So they were... for those who don't know, there was a massive power outage here in Texas and in other places last February, where right in the middle of the worst ice storm in 4 decades, the power decided to go out, killed a bunch of people, usually mostly old people who couldn't get to warm-up shelters and such. And I was only grateful for one aspect of it, which was there was a particular night during that when I had 2 layers of clothing on and 6 blankets and the dog under the blankets with me, and my feet would not warm up no matter what I was doing. And I was grateful for that one experience because I could say, okay, this is just a little bit of what those people in Antarctica felt, where no matter what you do, you cannot warm up your extremities.
No, you can't.
Yeah, and that's why they had those hot drinks. They really weren't drinks. They were hot meals called hooshes, which were 30% fat, mostly meat. There was still a differing opinion at the time as to what caused scurvy. So only the most forward-thinking people would say, let's throw an onion in the hoosh. And in fact, that's what they started doing after they knew Scott was dead, was starting to add the onions to the hoosh. So you basically drank down this really warm cup of fat with hopefully an onion, but mostly meat. And that was part of how you stayed alive. You needed the tent, you needed the hoosh, you needed the Primus heater to warm the hoosh. You lose any of those ingredients and you die. And in fact, that particular expedition with Jerry Garrard, they lost their tent. They were literally they had their heads tucked in their sleeping bags. It was so cold. And the tent suddenly blew away because they were facing, I think it was 100-mile-per-hour winds, they estimated. And the only thing that saved their lives was the wind flattened the tent against some rocks against a hill, so it didn't move. So when and luckily they had a little light. So when they got up after the wind had stopped, they found the tent, and they just looked at the tent and looked at each other, and they were all thanking God, because if that tent had gone, they would be gone.
Oh, yeah.
Without shelter, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shelter, water, and food in that order.
Yeah. I mean, you could dig a hole in the ice, like in the snow, and that'll give you some protection. It's recommended. Then you just tarp over top so the wind doesn't come down. But that's your ideal situation there. Because then, believe it or not, the lower you go in the snow, the warmer it is.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
When people
insulation.
The Inuit igloos can get up to 35 degrees. People go, 35 degrees? Well, how's that supposed to be warm? Yeah, but outside it's minus 70. So.
Yeah, compared to outside, it's the Bahamas.
And Random Menace says it's so cold. Red Amena says it's so cold, even the Russians, Canadians put on the second layer of long sleeves. So, yeah, that's about it.
Although I do know a couple of stupid people that, cut a hole in the ice and jump in the water at -30. But,
Well,
Yeah.
you know,
never
people
said they
here
were
in
brilliant.
West Central Texas, it gets down below 65 degrees and they got jackets on.
Yeah. And I knew a guy who came back from Saudi Arabia. He's walking around in 90-degree heat with a fall jacket on. And we're going, what are you doing? It was, what's cold out.
Yeah.
It's funny how we
Right.
get used to that. So the people who went back to Antarctica second or third time in that day, and probably now, are the people who can get used to that cold temperature very, very quickly.
Yeah. All right. So before we wrap this up, now we've talked about the sane people who went down to Antarctica. Let's talk about the insane people went down to Antarctica. My favorite is World War II is a wonderful topic, and we've covered a lot of that on this channel. We'll cover a lot more in the coming days, weeks, and years. But my favorite was all the rumors of where the sub pens were.
Mm-hmm.
And there was 2 that never have been found, never been proven. But if you talk to some people, they will tell you it is a factual. It is hand to God this happened, and that is there was one off the coast of Greenland, and then there was one in the Antarctic. There was the how can I put this? There was the German base down in Antarctica, and it's never been found. There is no documentation really that points to anything being built down there. But it got so much attention that there was an expedition sent during Truman years down. They sent destroyers down to check if they were there.
Expedition, yeah.
Massive expedition. This wasn't just, we're going to go take a little puddle jump over there with a couple of cutters. No, they sent a full fleet down.
They did.
Because they were
under
so
the command of Admiral Byrd.
Yeah, they were so hell bent that there had to be that sub base down there. Because the idea was that they built that so that if Germany fell, they could retreat there and rebuild and then come back. So they sent a full fleet down to inspect, never found a damn thing, but people to this day say there's a sub base down there to this day, which is bullshit, but whatever.
Or a UFO base.
Oh, that one too. Yeah.
That one. Yeah.
That's my favorite. I love the idea of that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they were in league with the Germans, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
depending on what movies you watch. Story. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Dark Side of the Moon too.
Oh yeah.
Depending on what movie you watch.
About that.
Yeah. But yeah, so to me, I just can't understand the logic of okay, well, yeah, we believe it so much that there's no proof, there's no evidence. You have all the documentation because you've taken over Germany, but they got so convinced that it was there, that they wasted time, money, and resources and sent this big fleet down there for absolutely no reason.
Them. Well, looking back, we can say there was no reason to send that fleet, but at the time, there were enough rumors that people were.
There was enough rumors.
Yeah,
there was enough rumors, but at the same time, just logistically, if you look at it, it makes no sense.
Yeah,
for where the subs were operating, it makes no sense.
No, it makes no sense. Most of the people who repeat the Antarctic conspiracy theories have no idea of the weather down there at all.
Yeah, it makes
just to the extent they don't even look at the modern
sense
forecast
at all. Yeah, it makes no logistic sense.
Worst place. Yeah, it's the worst place in the world to build a base. It is the. I mean, it's better to build a base in the Arctic Circle, where there are plenty, both in Russia and Canada,
Yes.
That is much more logistically sound because at least you have ice roads and such. And
Yeah.
Antarctica, you really don't know from one day
No.
to the next what's going to happen. Obviously, winter is worse than the other seasons, but even so, for
And
example,
it's
there
not
was
like we're talking about nuclear subs here. We're
Right.
talking about
Right.
diesel subs,
diesel,
right?
yeah.
So
Where would you
it's
get
not
the
the
diesel?
same kettle. Yeah, and not only that, but they need to surface. Well, there's places
Yeah.
down there where that ship ain't surfacing at all.
Right, right.
Because that ice
They're
is
not-
completely
they're-
unpredictable.
Yeah, they're not nukes. They're not nuclear subs. They're diesel subs. Different kettle of fish. But they believed it so much they did send that expedition down,
They did.
full fleet, ready for prep for war.
And yeah, luckily they didn't find anything.
Yeah,
Luckily,
luckily.
And then
Yeah.
James Furman says, what would they use to rebuild? Spritz came up with a floating iceberg aircraft carrier, and that's true. They used pykrete.
It was built here in Canada.
Yeah.
The test model was built in Canada. It was floated in, I believe, the Great Lakes. And part of it is still there, I believe. Basically, wood chips and ice. But yes.
Yeah, and newspapers and such. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was test floated in Canada. The theory was sound. It would have worked. What ended up trumping that was air cover, because up until that point, air cover couldn't reach the entire Atlantic, and so they had the air gap, which is where the submarine wolf packs would hang out in the Atlantic. There was an air gap. So they felt that, okay, if we have this unsinkable aircraft carrier, because that's what it would have been, you wouldn't have been able to sink the damn thing. It was just too big. Basically, it would have been a floating island, and they would have closed the air gap. What ended up happening was they ended up having aircraft, by the time the thing's ready to go, that could do the job already. So they closed the air gap, and, well, there went the aircraft carrier.
And Mountains of Elysium says Antarctica is fake. Godzilla lives beyond the ice wall.
yeah, I want to
Because
know where
that's
this
right.
ice wall is.
Well, according to flat Earth theory, it rings around the entire flat Earth, and that's what you're actually dealing with when you're in Antarctica.
And
Right, I've heard-
Mark the
I've heard
Infiltrator
that
says,
before.
Yeah,
says,
that's
well,
true.
that was South America. Well, that's where they actually went to, was South America.
Right.
Where they thought they were going to was Antarctica. Well, where they actually went to was there. Yeah.
Well, see,
South
there's a rule
America's
with
on
that.
the way. Antarctica.
Our Argentina was big after World War II.
Mhm. Oh yeah.
And
See,
depending
people
on
don't
who
willingly-
you believe, there are apparently sightings of a certain leader after 45.
Hmm.
Depending on
I
who
wonder
you
who that
believe.
is.
The Chaplin impersonator.
Yes, Delphi was apparently seen as late as the 50s.
Well, here's the problem with the whole official history as far as that Chaplin impersonator. The Russians got to the bunker first and said, we got some of the bone fragments from the dude. And it took decades to convince the Russians to do some testing on that. And they finally did, now that we have DNA.
Yeah,
And
it was
they
a
found
woman.
out that the jawbone's a woman. So
It was
we
a
actually don't
woman's-
know where the body is.
No, was never found. No.
Never found.
Because at the end of World War II, you're right. The Russians claimed they had the body.
Yep.
And they took the skull. They pressed and pressed and pressed for testing. Finally, after the fall of the USSR, they put it in for testing, and it was a female, and it wasn't Braun.
Yep.
Which,
So we
because
don't know who it
the bones were too young to be his wife, because at the end of the World War II, she was his wife, mistress right up until
Right
the
until
day
the end, yeah.
before, and then they
Yeah,
had the
something like
wedding.
that.
Yeah. So
What should we do on a honeymoon? I was thinking of poison. Oh,
Yeah, a gun for me and a little bit of
I
poison
was
for you,
hoping
dear.
for Niagara Falls. No poison. Oh,
Yeah, basically. However, I mean
okay.
that story is one hell of a interesting thing. They did a whole TV series on it. But I mean, again, it's who you believe and what you believe. But yeah, I mean, was it possible? Yes.
Well, it's
Just
possible
the
all
fact that
sorts
they
of
had a
things like
body
that.
double on site. Just saying.
The problem
It
with
is
the
possible.
idea of the Chaplin impersonator escaping was how did he actually get to the North Sea? What route was open at
Plain.
that time?
It's plain. Because
I thought so.
that's how Eichmann and a couple of the other ones got out, was by plane.
Oh, there's okay. So they were saying that he was on one of those flights.
Yeah,
I see.
yeah.
Okay,
So
I
the
never
body
did quite figure
double,
that out because
the theory is the body double takes his spot.
Right.
oh, I see.
He leaves. It's never announced that he left. The body double assumes the role of him. The body double takes his life, giving plausible deniability. The bodies are burned, so there's no identification. He's on a plane. Yeah, that's
I get you.
the conspiracy theory in a nutshell. Without going
either
too
way,
far
the
into
guy
the weeds.
is either way the guy is dead, and good riddance to him.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
his health was failing at the time anyway. So
Oh yeah, he's a drug addict and such.
yeah. So
And
well,
James
that
Furman says, "I
on more
love the
drugs
clip
than
of the
the.
two." I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no
Go
problem.
ahead. Go ahead, old media guy.
James Furman says, "I love the clip of the two flat earthers trying to prove their theory by holding a light above the ground, only to prove the world is curved." That's in that fantastic flat earther documentary on Netflix, where they really go into really talking to these people. And there's a wonderful little segment where a bunch of, for lack of a better word, normal scientists are talking, having a little get together in a bar, and they're talking about different topics. And this guy brings up flat earthers, and instead of saying horrible things about them, he says, what we're looking at are failed scientists, people that we have failed to educate into how science works properly. And that's probably the best way to put it. And that's the same with conspiracy theories. Like, it could be that so and so got away from this bunker and went there. Yeah, but what does the evidence say? If nothing else, the evidence says the man's dead. Thank God.
The evidence says
And
the man's dead.
also,
But I mean, depending on what you classify as evidence, which is a whole new kettle of fish.
True.
The way I look at it like
Yeah.
this: every conspiracy has a grain of truth. Because you need,
otherwise they wouldn't work.
Otherwise, they wouldn't work. They need a grain of truth. And the one that we're talking about right now, which is kind of taking you off your topic, and I'm sorry, but there's enough grains to go, because if you look at the FBI and the Russian factors after World War II, Stalin was convinced he didn't die. There's documentation Stalin was convinced he made it out. The FBI for years believed he didn't die in the bunker.
Yeah.
Now, that's documented.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
So
it could be. It could be.
Right.
True.
There's enough grains of truth in there to make you go, will we ever know the answer? No.
No, we won't. And that's part of just my personal philosophy. If the evidence isn't there, then I don't want to think about it day after day because the evidence isn't there. I mean, if you want to write a novel about it where it did happen, that's great. But
yeah,
as far as were there military bases in Antarctica, all the evidence we have says no. Well, they could have classified it. Yeah, I realize that, but the weather and the terrain and the availability of foodstuffs and diesel
it's
and
just
all the
not
rest
feasible. It's
yeah,
not feasible.
Just wouldn't work.
No. And that's
They
true for
wouldn't
most
for Antarctica.
conspiracy
They
theories.
would need a major power, not a minor power, a major power supplying them, and there's just not enough.
Yeah, there's nothing to
Evidence
burn.
there.
That's why bringing ponies there was a magnificent mistake, because what are you going to feed the ponies? You had to bring their own fodder. Well, why are you bringing the animals and their fodder? At least the dogs, you can kill the penguins and feed the penguins to the dogs.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, I think we've had a good hashed out a good discussion. We've given some people some points to think. Before we get out of here, I do want to kind of shamelessly plug myself here. I will be on Orville Nation's channel today at 5 p.m. Eastern. Hopefully, you'll all tune in. A very special unboxing. I'm not going to let any more out of the bag on that one. Hopefully, Orville Nation doesn't get too mad at me for promoting it. But yes, I will be on Orville Nation today at 5, and looking forward to it. Thank you, Old Media Guy, for joining us. We'll
You
have
bet.
to have
Thanks
you
for
on
having me.
again.
Appreciate
And
you coming
Jeff,
on, Old Media Guy.
any final
You bet.
thoughts before I wrap this sucker up?
If
Well, I just
you're
want to invite
interested
everyone.
in-
Go ahead, Old Media Guy.
Oh, just if you're interested in the Antarctica material, that book 1912, the year the world discovered Antarctica, that's the best place to start. That's it.
Okay. We'll put those in the show notes.
Yeah, and also the links you gave me, the I believe were those.
Yes.
They're in the
Yeah, the
description.
1912 book, and
Okay.
then the
Yeah, they're in the
longest winter,
description
which
of the
is
video
about this.
of the live stream.
Yeah.
Again, thank you all, and as a distinguished colleague of mine used to say, thank you and good night.